What's your creepiest real-life story? Story 1. When I was little, around 8, I hated going to the dentist. He always made me uncomfortable for some reason. I remember thinking his smile stretched too far and seemed forced like a clown's. Anyway, my mom always came with me and went back with me so I wouldn't be scared. One day my dad had me, my parents were divorced, and he had to take me to the dentist, but he tried to make me go back alone so he could sit in the lobby doing whatever. The assistants had to literally drag me back to the room, and you could hear me screaming and crying down the hall, refusing to sit in the chair. Finally, my dad came back to get me, irritated that I'd made a scene. He rescheduled my appointment for when my mom would have me, and we just left. He made a big deal about how badly I was acting and told my mom she was spoiling me and said all sorts of things. 2 weeks later, it was on the news that my dentist had been arrested for illegal activity involving children, after reports that he had done inappropriate things to them under anesthesia and recorded it. Story 2. I lived in a small college town, and my apartment complex was within walking distance of the bar in downtown area. One weekday night, I stepped out onto our front porch to smoke a cigarette or two. I was up late studying. I brought my textbook with me and sat down on the stairs while I smoked. A girl, who I had never met but who lived in the apartment one over and on the ground floor, came home from downtown. She was by herself, and you could tell from her walk that she had been drinking. She got into her apartment and barely got the door closed before some guy, who came out of nowhere, knocked on her door. She opened it, and I noticed he introduced himself, which was strange because it was after 2:30 a.m. Who goes to a stranger's apartment at that hour? So I decided to stay outside and keep an eye on things. They ended up talking for over 10 minutes. She later admitted how odd the situation felt but didn't know how to end the conversation. He did the creepiest things. He reached up and stroked her hair at least 3 times and kept trying to inch closer to her and the door. I made a point of being loud with my textbook so he would know I was there, and eventually he disappeared as eerily as he had arrived. We called the police, and days later they had the girl and me sit with a sketch artist. As soon as the sketch was made public, calls poured in. The man turned out to be a repeat offender who would follow women home from bars and pretend to be a cab driver offering them a ride. This girl just got lucky because she lived so close to the bars, he didn't get a chance to use his usual routine. Story 3. When I was little, my mom would take me to Kmart and let me wander around the toy section while she shopped. Normal in the 70s. One day as I was playing Simon Says, an older man walked up to me and started making small talk while I played. He eventually told me to come with him and took me by the hand. We walked right down the main center aisle of the store, straight toward the exit sign in the back. As we crossed the last row, I looked to the right and saw my mom at the end of the row. I told him I saw my mom and had to go. I pulled my hand away and ran down to her. I didn't tell her what happened because I didn't want to get in trouble for going with a stranger. It was several years later that I realized I had probably narrowly avoided being abducted or worse. Story 4. On a cold winter night in a remote village in Quebec, Canada, in 1990, my 2 brothers and I were asleep. We were 1, 3, and 6 years old. In the middle of the night, someone entered our house without knocking, walked around, and was talking to himself. Our house was 2 miles from the village in a rural area. My father woke up and went to the living room where the man was. He had a car accident 1 mile from our house with his buddy, who died instantly. His scalp had fallen in front of his face, so the first time my father saw him, he saw a man with no visible face. He was drunk and his body was frozen. He was speaking to himself, "Je vais mourir, je vais mourir," which means, "I'm gonna die." The fact that his face was partially frozen may have saved his life by preventing too much blood loss. My father drove him to the hospital, which was 25 kilometers from our house. He survived. To this day, my father still feels thankful that we didn't wake up during the night with all the noise. Story 5. Went camping with some friends on a hill a few kilometers out in the woods from one of the guys' houses. There are a few hiking and 4-wheeling trails in the area that lead up to the hill, so it's known by the locals. It was about midnight. We had a fire going, and were just sitting around having a good time. Then the guy, there were 4 of us, sitting across from me yelled, "Who are you?" I turned around, and there was this man, about 6 feet tall, staring at us from the edge of the woods with a big rock in his hand. One guy knocked an arrow in the compound bow we had. The guy across from me grabbed the hatchet, and I pulled the knife off my belt. We had no clue what we were doing, but the man wouldn't say anything to us. He eventually just backed into the woods. No sleep was had that night, and we kept a very large fire going. Story 6. We were partying at a usual spot by the river, and some guy came out of the woods. He just kept saying weird things like, "You gotta watch yourself down here," and "There are some bad folks around here." When asked who he was, he just said, "I'm nobody." We were all a little freaked out and basically told the guy to leave. A couple of days later, a girl went off the rope swing there and got seriously injured. Someone had put fishing hooks all over the bottom of the rope swing, and it tore chunks of flesh from her leg. Later, we found out the guy was just someone who lived nearby. Although he was a creepy drunk, he was harmless. There was, however, a really messed up family living up the road that he would warn people about. About 5 years later, just last year, they attacked a kid with a log and kidnapped a girl at gunpoint, taking her on a joyride. Story 7. Once I was walking my dog in a park in London, Ontario. There are houses that sit on the edge of the park and back onto the Thames River and hiking trails. It was a pretty hot day and my dog was thirsty, so I brought him to the river to drink. We got down to the river and were behind a house with a large privacy fence that sat on the edge of the park. While my dog was drinking, I heard loud banging noises coming from the backyard, like a hammer. I thought somebody was building a shed or something. All of a sudden, the hammering stopped and a man said, "Shut up! Nobody knows you're here." Then the banging started again. I froze in fear and ran up the bank back into the park. I was now directly beside that creepy house. A man came out of the backyard gate in fatigues with a rusty old wheelbarrow, heading toward 2 vans parked in front of his house. He noticed me looking at him as I was walking past, set down the wheelbarrow, and just stared at me until I was out of the park. I called the police when I got home, and I still have no idea what happened. Story 8. I was born and raised in North Dakota. Back when I was in high school, a group of us would research murders that occurred out in the county. We would then go out to find the scenes and film the exploration at night. This was about 2 years before Blair Witch. It was something to do while we got wasted on bad beer and teenage nonsense. Eventually, we ran out of places to go, ND, Marmarners, few people, few crimes, and got really good at finding abandoned rural farmsteads by driving dirt roads and looking for the signs. Rut roads, deliberate tree groves, and old mailbox posts were common markers. We were out looking when we spotted a tree grove that seemed out of place, sure sign, and drove through the field until we discovered an old, but not too old house. It had padlocks on the outside doors that were knocked off pretty easily. We removed them and entered the kitchen. There were 6 of us, all with flashlights, and we lit up the kitchen dining area pretty well. The table was the first thing you noticed, and it was strange because of how normal it looked. It was set for a meal, and not a single bowl was out of place. Only thing was, we'd been in dozens of these houses and place settings were a first, especially intact ones. As we explored, we found the fridge had gross remnants of a full stock, and the cupboards were full of canned and dry food. That was also a first. One guy found mail on the counter from early June 1978, and another found a creepy old TV guide in the living room with UFOs on the cover. All the family photos were still hanging up. Mom, dad, brother, and sister in their full 1970s glory. Furniture was dusty, but in good shape. Closets were full. Everything was totally normal, which made it incredibly abnormal. We started realizing that this house had not been moved out of. It had been straight up abandoned. Imagine locking the door to your house and never returning. That's the state this house was in. Complete unplanned departure. We went upstairs and split into 3 pairs to check out the 3 rooms. Ours was the closest, and it was obviously the younger boy's room. I can't describe it too well because almost immediately, from down the hall, we heard the most terrifying scream I've ever heard. We ran into the hallway and started yelling questions at each other all at once. After a few, very long seconds, the 2 screamers caught their breath and said, "You have to go in and see." Walking down the hall and into the room, I prayed I wouldn't freak out in front of my friends. I shouldn't have worried. Everyone was as scared as I was. The room opened up to the left of the doorway, and centered on the right side of the room was a queen-sized bed. Propped up on pillows with a blanket drawn to the waist, arms on top of the blanket, and worst of all, head turned slightly so it was looking directly at the doorway, was a life-size porcelain doll. Snow-white skin, jet black hair, cold, lifeless eyes. The dead eyes lit up in the flashlight beam, like it was waiting for us. If the head hadn't been turned, I could have excused it, but it was turned. Ready for when we walked in? Ready for 20 years. We made hasty exits down the stairs and into the car. On the ride back, we got even more creeped out when we realized that even though the house had been abandoned, someone had taken the time to set up that doll. Not packing food, clothes, or family photos. Setting up the doll was one of the last things done in that house. We researched the family's names but found nothing. No tragic accident, no crime, no extended relatives. Just a strange time capsule in the middle of nowhere. We later found out the county had taken possession of the land due to unpaid taxes, explaining the locks, but we never found out what happened to them or why they left that doll. Story 9. Working as a paramedic, I was dispatched to what was reported as a simple assault in a rough neighborhood. It was around 10 p.m. We arrived at the address to find a man standing behind a row of parallel parked cars in front of his house, yelling in a strange, high-pitched voice. The police were trying to calm him down. Our first assumption was that this was the person who was injured, but once we got the gurney around the cars, we saw what was really going on. A man was dead, slouched in the gutter against a Mini Cooper. I'll never forget coming around the car and seeing him. There was a really unsettling moment that lasted a couple of seconds where I thought he was alive and staring at me. Then I realized he was looking through me. Then I realized he was gone. He was shirtless and had been stabbed multiple times. And these were not typical wounds. Most stabbings I'd seen up to that point were clean punctures. This man's chest and abdomen had been shredded. It was brutal. The man on the curb kept yelling in that high, wobbly voice, crying and asking if his roommate would be okay. We started CPR and transported him to the hospital, knowing deep down there was no chance of survival. After the doctor officially pronounced him, a couple of police officers came over from the scene to finalize some paperwork. One of them told us something chilling. The story they had heard before our arrival was that the victim had stepped outside for a smoke, and when his roommate went to check on him, he found him stabbed to death. But after we left, someone noticed a trail of blood leading from inside the house to the curb, implying the stabbing happened indoors. When the police confronted the roommate, he ran inside and barricaded himself. SWAT was actually on the scene at that moment. So as it turned out, the person who most likely committed that horrible act had been standing right behind me for most of the call. Story 10. A few years back, I rented an apartment from a friend of mine. He had recently bought it and had it completely renovated. He put it up for sale but couldn't find a buyer, so I offered to rent it in the meantime. After moving in, I realized there was something seriously wrong with the lady next door. She was about 45 but looked much older. She would sit up all night listening to religious radio shows and talking loudly to someone. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep, so I went over and asked her to keep it down. She opened the door and I got a quick look inside. Her walls were covered in crosses, painted in different colors, with words like Jesus and angels scribbled everywhere. The windows were painted black, letting no light in. It was damp, with yellow-stained 50-year-old carpet, mess everywhere, and cockroaches. No dog, but definitely a strong odor. I asked her again to please keep it down. She just stared at me and shut the door, then turned up the radio even louder. The next night, my girlfriend was staying over. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw the shadow of someone standing next to the bed looking at us. At first, I thought I was hallucinating. It happens sometimes when I'm sleepy. But then the shadow started speaking. It was my neighbor, and she was holding something in her hand. She had broken in during the night, and who knows how long she had been standing there. "You should lock your door at night," she said, and then walked out. The next morning, I heard strange noises outside my bedroom window. It was my neighbor talking to herself in a strange voice. She had a plastic bag in her hand, with what turned out to be her deceased dog inside. It was hot outside, and I could smell decay coming from the bag. At this point, I was terrified. She was clearly in a very bad mental state. I went upstairs and knocked on another neighbor's door and asked what was going on. The guy was just as scared as I was. Apparently, she had broken into his apartment one evening while he was watching TV with his kids. He got up to get a snack, and when he returned, she was behind the couch, silently staring at him, holding a power drill. Now I knew what she had in her hand that night. By this point, I was at my limit. I called the police and they already knew about her. Apparently, she was unstable and hadn't been taking her medication. But since she owned the unit They couldn't legally enter her apartment without permission. The only way they could act was if she left the premises. I stayed up for the next 2 days, waiting for her to run out of cigarettes. When she finally left around 2 a.m. to go across the street to a convenience store, I called the police. Within minutes, 3 police cars and a special response van showed up. They restrained her, put her in the van, and drove her off to an institution. Just like that, she was gone. I never saw her again, but I still have nightmares about waking up and seeing her standing over me in the dark. Story 11. I've posted this before, but it fits this topic. I'm not a great storyteller, so bear with me. A few years ago, my best friend and I went on a road trip to the States for a music festival. We met up with friends, saw a lot of cool stuff, and had a great time. One of our friends came back home with us because he needed to get back for school, and his buddies wanted to stay longer. We decided to drive straight home in shifts. The full trip took 24 hours. My story starts when I was doing the night shift driving at about 2 a.m. It was a beautifully clear night, full moon, no clouds, summer weather. As I was noticing all this, I realized we had followed the GPS onto a back road and were driving into a massive valley. There were open fields and no other signs of life. No cars, no houses, and no cell signal. Our satellite signal cut out too, so we lost satellite radio, GPS, and phone service. I wasn't too concerned since I knew this road went on for another couple of hours. About 20 minutes after entering the valley, we came upon a bridge. As we approached, I saw a car pulled off to the side of the road. Not unusual. People sometimes sleep in pullouts. What was strange was that the windows were completely blacked out. With all the moonlight, we should have been able to see at least a bit inside, but it was pitch black. And the car had no visible license plate. We figured it was abandoned until we passed it and suddenly its lights turned on and it pulled out behind us. At first, we figured the driver was lost and maybe wanted to follow someone out. But it didn't explain the blacked out windows or the missing plate. The unease started to build. This car began tailgating us in the middle of nowhere. The feeling grew stronger, a deep sense that something was very wrong. It wasn't just nerves, it was a survival instinct kicking in. I don't scare easily, but this was different. Then just as the fear peaked, we saw something in the middle of the road. The car behind us slowed down immediately. My passengers, one of whom had been asleep, also saw it. As we got closer, we realized it looked like a body. This wasn't a wide road. No shoulders, just deep ditches on both sides. I wasn't about to stop. I warned everyone I was going through it. As we got closer, we realized it wasn't a person. It was a scarecrow. I drove over it. The car behind us, small enough to avoid it, just kept following. I sped up, it sped up. I slowed down, it slowed down. Finally, I floored it. After about 2 minutes, the car behind us suddenly slowed, did a U-turn, and drove back. My passenger turned to me and said, "I swear I saw spikes in that thing." Thankfully, we were in a big truck with a wide wheelbase and cleared it completely. About 30 minutes later, our cell service came back and the GPS reconnected. It wasn't until we got home at 5 a.m. that we remembered there had been reports of missing people in our province. Tourists who had vanished while driving home. They were never found. We're convinced we narrowly escaped something horrible. Later, we contacted the police and filed a full report, but we couldn't pinpoint the exact location, so there wasn't much they could do. I just hope nobody else ever encounters what we did. Story 12. This happened to a friend of mine's housemate during their time at university. It was at the house she lived in before moving in with my friend after this event occurred. During her second year at university, she lived in a house with 3 other people. At Easter, everyone went back home to their parents for the holiday. Her first night back after returning from the break, she woke up in the morning to find some things moved around in her bedroom. She thought nothing of it and figured she must have moved them herself the night before and just didn't remember. The next morning, more stuff had been moved, like her TV and chair. She started to get scared and told her housemates to quit messing with her things because it wasn't funny and was really creeping her out. They all insisted they hadn't touched anything. The next morning, even more things had been moved, and she became very worried. Again, she confronted her housemates, but they swore they hadn't done anything and were starting to get concerned too. On the 4th night, she woke up in the middle of the night and, in the darkness, saw a figure sitting at her desk. She completely panicked, ran out of the room, locked the door, and called the police. The officers arrived and unlocked her door. Sure enough, there was a guy, probably in his early 20s, just sitting at her desk, calm as anything. The police arrested him and took him away. A couple of days later, they found out the man was a person with developmental challenges who lived at a care home not far down the road. His mother, who had been his full-time carer, passed away about a year earlier, and after that, he had been placed in the home. He'd been reported missing for several weeks. It turned out that the house the girl and her friends were living in used to belong to him and his mother. In fact, the bedroom she was staying in had once been his. He eventually told the police that when he ran away from the care home, he returned to his old house. Somehow he managed to get inside and had been staying there for 2.5 weeks, sleeping under her bed. Each night, he would come out while she slept and rearrange the room to be just like it was when it was his bedroom. Needless to say, she moved out immediately, and that's when she ended up moving in with my friend. Story 13. I'm 11 hours late, but I'll share this anyway in case someone wants a creepy tale. About 6 years ago, I was in my final year of high school, and due to the strange schedule that 12th grade had at my school, we regularly had 2+ hour breaks between classes, early dismissals, and longer lunch breaks. My house was about a 20-minute walk from school, and I would usually walk home either by myself or with a friend and relax until it was time to go back. My school was on the outskirts of the city, and my house was even farther out. I lived on about 40 acres along a dirt road. While walking this road, I'd been noticing a really foul smell about 5 minutes from my house. I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from, but it was definitely close to the road. I passed that smell about 4 times over the course of a week and figured it was probably a dead animal, common in that area. After an exam, I was walking home with a friend, and the smell was stronger than ever. So naturally, we decided to walk into the grass and try to find the source. We found a black garbage bag completely puffed up like a balloon about 5 meters from the road. As a joke, I threw a rock at it and it popped, releasing a disgusting white goo. We both started gagging immediately and ran back to my place, laughing and dry heaving the whole way. I figured it was a dead cat or something someone had dumped. The following week, I was walking home from school alone when I noticed mounted police on horses slowly making their way down the road. Near one of the entrances to my property, there were officers with sniffer dogs searching the area. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I got closer to the area where we had found the bag, I got a sinking feeling in my stomach and thought, oh no. It turned out the bag contained the body of a young woman who had been murdered and dumped near the fence line of my property. I still feel sick thinking about it. Story 14. When I was about 10, my family of 6 lived in an extremely small apartment, 2 bedrooms upstairs and the living room below. When I got tired of my siblings, I would sleep downstairs. One night, I was lying on the couch facing the front door and watching the sky through the window beside it, when suddenly a face appeared in the window, illuminated by a lighter. I froze and the face disappeared. I felt relieved, thinking maybe it was one of our neighbors seeing if my parents were still awake. Then it showed up again. I tried to scream, but when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. The person then kicked in the door and walked into the room. He saw me, smiled, and walked toward the kitchen. Just as he came out holding a knife, my dad made it downstairs, and the guy ran out. I still can't sleep easily on couches to this day. Story 15. Not sure if this counts as creepy or not, but it stayed with me. I was walking through a ravine with my best friend when we were kids. We spent summers near Saugatuck, Michigan, and would hike through the rivers and ravines around there. We'd hiked about an hour through the shallow water and were looking for cool rocks when we came across a large black cord-looking thing. My friend picked it up and immediately froze, his face terrified. I had no idea what was happening. I was only in 5th grade. I didn't realize he'd grabbed a high-voltage wire and his body was locked in place. He couldn't move or say anything, just stood there as electricity flowed through him. I almost grabbed the wire to pull it from his hand, but something stopped me. Instead, I picked up a big rock and threw it onto his hands to knock the wire down. It worked. He came back to reality, though he was out of it for a while. We sat down and eventually walked back to our summer house. We never told anyone, but I've thought about it a lot. If I'd grabbed the wire too, we both might have been stuck there. I have no idea why I didn't. Just glad I was smart enough to hesitate. Story 16. When I was about 6, a car drove by my house while I was outside on a slip and slide with my next-door neighbor. The car slowed down when it got close to me, rolled down the window, and the driver started talking. But he was speaking so quietly I couldn't hear him. so I walked closer. He asked, "Don't you go to the school down the street?" I said, "Oh yeah." "Why?" He replied, "Because my son said he recognized you." I heard the car door unlock, and there was a man in his mid-30s sitting in the back seat. Just as the door started to open, I felt someone grab me by the collar and yank me into their arms. It was my neighbor's mom. She dragged me back to her house, and the moment the driver saw her, he sped off. When we got inside, she called the cops right away. I didn't even realize how close I had come to being taken until I saw my mom crying after hearing what had happened. Story 17. Not many creepy things happened to me, so sorry if this story seems mild, but it really shook me at the time. A few years ago, when I was about 14, I was out walking my dog, a hyper Chesapeake Retriever mix, in a rural suburban area. It was a quiet road with a car passing maybe every 5 minutes. An old gray Toyota Corolla passed by. Nothing unusual. But then it passed again a minute later, much slower this time. The driver seemed to be watching me. He continued passing up and down the road, clearly stalking me. I pretended to be on a call, talking into my hand as if I had a phone. The dog helped me feel a little safer. After the 6th or 7th time, I ducked into the woods and hid. He drove by 2 more times, then disappeared. I waited 10 minutes before running home, with my very confused and disappointed dog. Later, I think there was a news story that matched his description. Something about attempted assault. Could be wrong, but it still freaked me out. I didn't go for walks for a week after that. Story 18. When I was in middle school, my friends and I were hanging out on a trampoline in the backyard late at night, maybe around 11 p.m. The backyards in our neighborhood were all connected, separated by trees and small fences you could easily walk through. A man came by and asked if we'd seen a little orange tabby cat. We said no. He told us he lived around the corner and that if we found it, there would be a reward. We thought nothing of it and went back to talking about Pokemon cards and why Charizard is unbeatable. A couple of minutes later, a small cat wandered into the yard and we thought, "Is that the one he was talking about?" One of my friends grabbed it and we all proudly marched to the man's house. He was sitting on his front porch, excited to see the cat. He said, "Oh, I have the reward inside. Just come in and I'll give it to you." We felt uneasy but decided 2 of us would go in while 2 stayed outside. The man said, "If you don't come in, I can only give the reward to the ones who do." He offered $100 per person. The 2 who went in came out a while later with $200, but they said the house was covered in plastic and the whole vibe felt wrong. I really believe that if we had all gone in, something bad would have happened. Having 2 of us stay outside might have been what saved us. Story 19. My friend and I decided to explore an old group of houses, probably from the 1930s. The main house had 3 stories and was so overgrown that a fully grown tree was blocking the front door. Naturally, the only way in was through the cellar doors. We went in using just our phone lights. It wasn't too creepy at first, though the ceiling was low, maybe 5 feet. We checked the 2nd floor, still nothing. No furniture, no trash, just completely empty. Then the 3rd floor, same thing. That's when we realized how clean everything was. No dust, no dirt. It was spotless, which somehow made it creepier. Upstairs, we noticed a piece of plywood screwed into the wall. We pulled it off and found stairs to the attic. Inside the attic, there was a single chair facing the only window, which looked out toward a roller rink across the highway. I'm superstitious and was scared, but my friends sat in the chair and pointed out the eerie placement. Later, in another building that looked the same, we found nothing but conveyor belts and hooks hanging everywhere. Again, spotless except for rust on the chains. Upstairs, it was full of red leather books titled The Book of Knowledge. We went up to the attic again and found another chair, this one facing the steps we had just come up. It was surrounded by fox skulls. At that point, we were panicking. Maybe it had been a chicken farm, and the skulls were from foxes trying to steal chickens, but still, it was disturbing. We checked the basement, which was full of toys. Tonka trucks and other outdoor ones. Odd, but not terrifying. Then we explored the 5 broken-down campers on the property. None were upright. They were leaning against trees, on their sides or upside down. The largest one, about 25 feet long, was filled with newspapers. One was dated 2013, and this was last year. That's when we decided we were done. We plan to go back soon, though, so there may be more stories to come. Story 20. When I was 8, I had a friend spending the night. It was super late, and we were playing Barbies in the living room. I suddenly got the feeling that we were being watched. I looked to my right, and there in the window stood a man. I remember everything about him to this day. This was a little over 20 years ago. He was a white man. I could tell because he was wearing a short-sleeved, dark blue t-shirt with a small pocket on the chest. His arms were very hairy. He also wore black gloves and a black ski mask. He had his hands cupped on either side of his face, like he was blocking the glare from the street lights to get a better view of us. I yelped and curled into a ball. My friend saw him and did the same. She asked me what we were going to do. I said, "At the count of 3, we're going to run upstairs and get my dad." I only made it to 2 before I took off. My friend was right behind me. We barged into my dad's room and told him what we saw. He leapt out of bed and ran outside, but the guy was gone. Years later, I found out there had been a dangerous person active in our area at that time. Was he that person? I don't know, but I haven't liked leaving my curtains open at night ever since. Story 21. I was walking with my older brother one night. We were coming back from a game he had. It was probably around 9 or 10 p.m. at the time, and I was maybe 10. I'm now 18, about to turn 19 next month. As we approached the apartment building where we lived, we saw a figure. He looked about the size of an average man. The darkness concealed his upper body and face. We stopped in our tracks. Normally, security guards patrol the area, but their rounds don't start until 11. This shouldn't have scared us. But then he started sprinting at us. He was running incredibly fast. My brother screamed at me to run. He chased us down the length of an entire street until my brother told me to crawl under a fence that was slightly lifted from the ground, just enough for us to squeeze through. We were terrified, watching as the man tried to climb over the fence. Luckily, we were very close to home. A week later, we found out a child had gone missing the night after we escaped. To this day, that child has never been found. Story 22. I know I'm late to share this, but it feels good to finally talk about it. I've kept it mostly to myself. This happened about 10 years ago when I was 15. Female for context. My family owned an ice cream shop, and I had been working a late shift. It was around 1:30 a.m. when I left to catch the last bus home. I got to the stop and had to wait about 11 minutes. It was a reasonably safe area, but there were lots of bars nearby, so lots of drunk people. There were 2 men at the bus stop. One looked about 20, the other was middle-aged. That's all I remember about him. When I arrived, the younger man moved to sit in front of some bushes about 20 feet away. The older one came and sat right next to me on the bench. He made small talk. Nothing unusual, but he was clearly drunk. Then he told me his friend had had too much to drink and needed help. He asked me to go check on him, claiming he might be choking or something. I looked toward the younger man. He wasn't just near the bush anymore. He was sitting in it. I told the older man that I could call an ambulance, but he refused. That's when I started to feel horrified. There was no one else around, so I moved toward the streetlight, thinking maybe I'd be safer under it. That's when he got more aggressive, demanding that I go help his friend. I knew something was very wrong. The bus was still 6 minutes away. I looked around desperately for someone, anyone, but he caught on to what I was doing. I was holding a sundae cup filled with Smarties from the shop. What happened next is a bit fuzzy. He slapped the cup out of my hand and grabbed my arm. Then I saw hope. Cars were coming around the corner. I tried to jump into the street, hoping someone would notice. But even drunk, he was faster than me. He tackled me to the ground, hiding me from the road. He picked me up from behind, arms pinned to my chest, and began dragging me toward the bushes. I screamed and kicked as loud as I could, but he was overpowering me. When we got near the bushes, his friend reached out to grab me too. I knew what was going to happen. The next part is the blurriest. I heard tires screeching, men yelling. Suddenly, I was thrown to the ground as chaos broke out around me. I don't know how many people were there. The next thing I remember, I was being carried onto the bus, early, thank God. Probably the only reason I'm still here. I looked out the window and saw 5 or 6 men, bus passengers, attacking the 2 men who had tried to hurt me. I lost consciousness, likely from shock, stress, and a concussion. I woke up in the hospital. Both men were arrested at the scene. I was never asked to testify, but an officer visited a few months later to tell me that both men had been sentenced to 14 years for this and other crimes. My heart has never beat as fast as it did that night. Story 23. When I was around 17 or 18, I was walking home really late from a friend's house. I was on one of the main streets in my hometown when a car pulled up from a dark residential street. The driver saw me and motioned for me to come over. And I walked over because I was young and not thinking straight. He asked me if I knew how to get to the next town, and I said, "Yeah, just take this main street all the way down. Once you get over the bridge, you're pretty much there." He replied, "Oh, I don't know where this bridge is. Hop in, show me." I thought, what is this guy on? The bridge is literally at the end of the street. Then he asked me if I wanted to make 20 bucks. I just stared at him. That's when he said, "I like to do stuff," making an obscene gesture with his hands and mouth, his eyes wide and intense. I froze. I just shook my head and backed away. He didn't say anything else, just sped off down the street. I took a bunch of shortcuts I knew through the residential areas and booked it home. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. Story 24. When I was 8 or 9, my family took a trip to Toronto with my dad, who was there for business. He used to do this often, bring us along on trips so we wouldn't be apart for too long. We arrived at this really nice hotel. My parents, myself, and my 2 brothers. One was 7 and the other only 9 months old. It was one of the biggest hotels I'd ever seen at that age, so big that it seemed impossible to keep bumping into the same people again and again. The next morning after my dad went to his appointment, my mom took us to breakfast at the hotel cafe. While we were eating, a couple in their mid-30s or early 40s approached us. They looked ordinary, but their behavior was strange. They offered to feed my baby brother so my mom could eat her meal. My mom, who had always been very protective of us, surprised me by remaining calm but firm, politely declining their offer. They insisted twice more before finally walking away and leaving the cafe. Later, my mom took us to a shopping complex that was connected to the hotel. We noticed the same couple following us through part of the mall. My mom stopped and brought us into a store to let them pass. At that point, my 7-year-old brother and I looked at each other. We both knew this wasn't normal. My mom decided it might just be a strange coincidence. We eventually headed back to the hotel to go swimming. The pool was massive, stretching from indoors to outdoors. While my brother and I were in the water, my mom was sitting nearby with the baby, and there they were again, the couple, sitting across the pool, just staring at my mom. Shortly after, she told us we were going back to the hotel room because my dad would be back soon and want to go to dinner. Again, even as kids, my brother and I knew something wasn't right. The best part? When my dad finally came back to the hotel, he knocked on the door but didn't say who it was. My brother and I panicked and ran into the bathroom to hide. We were convinced it was that same creepy couple coming back for us. Story 25. Growing up, my family lived in a 2-family house on the 2nd floor in a Boston suburb. The layout was simple. The front of the house was the living room, the middle was the dining room, and the back was the kitchen. Bedrooms lined up with each room. My bedroom was next to the kitchen, which had a door leading to the back stairs. That door had a bolt lock on it. As a kid, I used to mess around with my little brother by pushing him into the stairway and locking him out. He'd push against the door, thinking I was just holding it closed, not knowing I had locked the bolt. I'd stand there laughing, but I could always hear the wood strain as he tried to push it open. One night I was asleep and something woke me up. I heard creaking footsteps on the back stairs, slow and light. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the sounds were real. Then they stopped. I heard a light creak, like someone was pushing gently on the door. Then louder creaking. The doorknob started jostling, and the door strained again. Then silence. I heard the person walk away, followed by the screen door squeaking open and then slamming shut. I was terrified. I quietly got out of bed and woke my mom. She was annoyed that I woke her up, but I told her what happened. She tried to convince me it was just a dream. I was freaking out and crying, trying to explain that someone had been trying to break in, when suddenly we heard gunshots. I hit the floor and my mom ran to the phone to call 911. The shots had come from our neighbor's house. Police arrived and the entire street lit up with blue lights. Officers were shouting at someone. We stayed away from the windows on that side of the house. After some time, things got quiet and my mom looked out. The police had a man handcuffed on the ground. They had entered the neighbor's house to find that the resident had been shot and killed. He was asleep when someone broke in. He got up to check the noise and was shot by the intruder. Story 26. This happened in an apartment in a complex in Coney Island during the 1980s. It seemed deserted, but the man inside invited me over to trade video games, which we actually did. But what I saw inside that apartment still sticks with me. There was a refrigerator fully stocked with pudding cups from top to bottom. In the largest room were 3 grand pianos, each covered with canvas tarps and jammed into the space like puzzle pieces. You had to crawl over or under them to move through the room. A ballroom-style chandelier hung from the ceiling, too large to fit properly, so it draped awkwardly over the pianos. There was no regular furniture or common electric appliances, no lamps, no TV, no toaster. The only things there were the fridge, a computer, and the fan. His bedroom had a bunk bed, despite him living alone, and the window had been completely removed and replaced with an industrial fan that blasted air into the room like a hurricane. The fan was so powerful that it would blow floppy disks off the desk, which were weighed down with, you guessed it, pudding cups. And he lived on the 13th floor. The man himself, completely normal looking. I have no idea how I made it out of there safely. All I can say is, fortune favors fools and the eccentric. And this story had both. Story 27. Here's a bit of nautical weirdness. Maybe more strange than scary, but it really spooked me. I served in the Coast Guard for 4 years, 2 of them aboard a 210-foot cutter homeported in North Carolina. We patrolled the Caribbean often, which meant passing through the Bermuda Triangle regularly. Now, before you call out aliens or legends, I'll say this. The Caribbean, especially near the Sargasso Sea, can be strange on its own. There are dead calm conditions where the ocean and sky seem to melt into one another, freak squalls that hit out of nowhere, and even St. Elmo's fire. It's surreal. During my time, I stood a lot of watches, particularly the 4 a.m. to 8 a.m. shift. Graveyard watch. One night, while on helm in the Bermuda Triangle, the quartermaster asked me for a compass check. I looked into the small window at the magnetic compass, and it was spinning rapidly. My stomach dropped. I never thought I'd actually see something like that, but there it was. When I told the quartermaster I couldn't give him a reading, the GPS computer suddenly went dead. It just shut off. The glow from the computer, which lit the desk, was gone. The officer of the watch immediately went up to the flying bridge to make sure nothing metal was interfering with the compass. He called the captain and the engineers up. For the next 45 minutes, everyone was on full alert. We even suspected a submarine might be tailing us, but sonar showed nothing. Eventually, the captain, normally very professional, just said, "Well, that's the weirdest thing I've ever seen," and returned to his cabin. The poor quartermaster had to navigate using dead reckoning until we reached Miami. I've got plenty more spooky sea stories if people want to hear them. Story 28. After high school, I went through a phase where I thought I wanted to join the military. I met with recruiters from each branch, but none were as persistent as the Marine. He came through my line one day while I was cashiering at my high school job and left a business card. I called him the next day, and he came to my house. We did the reading test and that card exercise where you rank what's most important to you, and he tells you how the Marines can help you achieve that. I visited his office in a nearby town and toured the facility where potential recruits met every Tuesday and Thursday to train for PT tests. He came through my line at work about once a week to check on me. Eventually, I decided against the military lifestyle after talking with my family and boyfriend, who weren't supportive. I saw the Marine again and told him I had changed my mind. That's when things took a turn. He started showing up every day. Every single day I worked, he was there. I'm not sure if he knew my schedule or just guessed, but he never missed a shift. Everything came to a head one night when I was working the closing shift. He came in around 8:30, we made small talk, and he left. I finished work and walked out at 10:15 through the employee exit, and he was there, waiting. He walked me to my car and leaned against my car door, blocking me from getting in. He kept pushing me to join the Marines. I don't know what he saw in me, but he was persistent. A few coworkers came out, and I tried to signal them, but they didn't notice. After about 30 minutes of uncomfortable and increasingly creepy conversation, I told him I forgot my jacket inside. I planned to go in and either call the police or ask security to walk me out. As I walked away, he handed me his jacket, apologized, and told me to get into my car to warm up. I got in, tried to hand him his jacket through the window, but he insisted I wear it. Then he said he'd follow me home and get it from me there. I slowly drove out of the lot, terrified. I didn't know if I should call the police. I was young and unsure. This man was big, had military training, and likely a weapon. I called my boyfriend and asked what to do. His dad, who was in the special forces, told me to come to their house. He'd be waiting on the porch with a firearm. I turned off the highway earlier than expected and floored it. I don't know if the Marine gave up or just couldn't find me, but when I arrived, my boyfriend's dad was outside, and the Marine wasn't. I stayed there that night. The next day, I called a friend who was a local police officer. He told me to contact the Marine's commanding officer and explain the situation. I also mentioned I still had the jacket. The CO arranged a time for me to drop it off at the office when he was sure the Marine wouldn't be there. When I arrived, he took the jacket and assured me that the Marine would be reassigned far away. I think that jacket may have helped seal his fate. Story 29. My boyfriend and I decided to visit a secluded hot spring in Idaho. It was March, but there was still a lot of snow on the ground. The hike was only 2 miles in, but the warm, humid air had made the ground slick and dangerous. We weren't going to let that stop us. When we got there, we got undressed, soaked in the water, drank some wine, smoked a little, and enjoyed our time. We were there for hours without seeing a single person. We figured the slippery terrain was keeping people away. Then we spotted a man walking up toward the hot spring. We figured he would just get in after we left. But instead, he climbed up to where we were sitting and started asking questions. "Have you seen any deer or animals?" We told him no and offered to leave if he wanted to get in. But he didn't get in. He just stood there staring at me. I was still naked. The atmosphere shifted. We both got extremely uncomfortable. My boyfriend started preparing himself for a confrontation. He had a knife, but it was in his backpack, which was several feet away. Eventually, the man turned and walked off. We got dressed as fast as we could and hiked out. The whole way back, we felt like we were being watched. To add to the creepiness, it wasn't hunting season, and the man didn't have a gun or any gear that made him look like he was out there for wildlife. I honestly thought something awful was about to happen, that I'd be assaulted and my boyfriend attacked. We were both silently thinking about worst-case scenarios. Thankfully, it didn't escalate, but it easily could have. Story 30. A few years back, my girlfriend and I took a month-long road trip up the west coast of the U.S., stopping at national parks and camping along the way. One day, we were on our way to Death Valley a bit late in the day, around 5 p.m. We knew the sun would set around 8 o'clock, so we aimed to make it in time to capture some golden hour shots of the sand dunes. We're both photographers. I'm not sure how much people know about Death Valley, but it's the lowest elevation in North America and has zero cell phone reception. When you head in, it's strongly advised that you let someone know where you're going and what time you plan to leave. If no one hears from you by then, they can call dispatch to search. Without that, finding someone can be like looking for a needle in a haystack. We made the 2-hour drive through 120 degrees Fahrenheit heat, windows down, AC off to prevent overheating, and reached the sand dunes just in time. We got some incredible shots. There's something eerie about sunsets in Death Valley. The streaks of purple and red haze that glow behind the mountains feel surreal. We got back to the car in the dark and began our long drive back. Just knowing that a single flat tire could leave us stranded put me on edge, so I was focused. About 20 minutes into the drive, I noticed headlights behind us, approaching fast. They started flashing their high beams. I figured they wanted to pass, so I pulled slightly to the side, but they stayed behind me, still flashing their lights. I thought maybe they needed help. I slowed to a stop but didn't get out. The car stopped behind us. Through the rearview mirror, I saw it was a minivan. I couldn't see who was inside, but there was movement, people shuffling around. Then the side door of the van slid open, and a light came on inside. I saw 5 or 6 teenagers grabbing things from different parts of the van. One by one, they began stepping out, walking toward our car. I floored it. Within seconds, their headlights were just tiny specks in the distance behind us. I don't know what they were doing, and I wasn't about to find out. The whole experience left us shaken for the rest of the night. Story 31. One night, I was getting ready for bed around midnight after watching some bad TV. I called my dog and stepped into the backyard. There was no moon and no yard light, just pitch blackness. As I stood there waiting for the dog to wander out, I suddenly got the strongest feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't the usual paranoia about the dark. It was like my brain's proximity alarm was going off full force. The air was still, dead quiet. It felt wrong. My dog, a big white bull terrier, 90 pounds of muscle, trotted out, stretched, and yawned. Suddenly, his ears shot up. Now, bull terriers have a unique stance when they catch a scent. They freeze like they're ready to pounce. This was the friendliest dog I've ever had. Wouldn't hurt a fly. But right then, his hackles rose, and he started growling like I'd never heard before. He was staring into the darkness, furious, and then he charged into it, barking and snarling. I lost it. I yelled for him, screamed at whoever was out there, and ran after him, swinging my arms, silently praying I didn't hit anyone. It all happened so fast. Then I heard it, a sickening thwack. My dog yelped and came tearing back to the house, tail between his legs, head covered in blood. I froze, barefoot, in the dark. My fear turned to rage. Someone had hurt my dog. I stood tall and shouted into the night, "If he's not okay, I swear I'll find you." Then I heard loud scraping and thudding at my wooden gate, like someone was climbing it. Then silence. I ran inside and found my dog hiding under the couch. I hugged him tight and calmed him down. His head was soaked in blood, from nose to ears, but once I cleaned him, I couldn't find any wounds. That's when I realized he must have injured the intruder, probably tore their legs up pretty bad. I let him sleep in my bed that night, with me holding a baseball bat just in case they came back. My dog stayed his goofy, lovable self, but from that night on, he had a little extra swagger. And honestly, he earned it. Story 32. I'm a very practical and logical person. When I first experienced sleep paralysis, I did some research and found out that it often comes with odd and sometimes scary hallucinations. But ultimately, it's not harmful. I've gotten pretty used to it now. Anyway, I live with my parents in the Hudson Valley in an old wooden house built in 1712. It's definitely old, but still very comfortable. One night, I fell asleep in the attic on the guest bed while watching The Walking Dead. Around 6 a.m., I had a dream. I don't remember the beginning of it, but I do remember trying to escape the house for some unknown reason. Suddenly, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread. I assumed it was related to my sleep paralysis starting to kick in. But then I got this really intense sensation that some kind of feminine spirit or presence wanted me to stay. Desperately. It wasn't violent, but the feeling was so strong, so emotional, that I felt stuck. That's when I noticed I couldn't move. Classic sleep paralysis. I focused on moving my pinky finger, which usually helps me snap out of it, and eventually I woke up. A few seconds later, the door at the back of the attic, the creepy part of course, suddenly popped open. Now that door has a latch that's pretty secure. You can push on it all you want, but if it's shut properly, it doesn't open unless the latch is lifted. And yes, it has opened by itself before, at random moments, but still. I got up, closed it, and got back into bed. I turned on the lamp on the nightstand. Within a few seconds, the lamp blinked off and back on. That could have been a number of things. Wiring, power fluctuation. But I'd never seen it do that before. I don't believe in ghosts, but this particular experience has been hard to explain logically, especially the latch. I've tested it. You have to physically lift it or that door won't open. And it still happens occasionally, always at night. Story 33. I had been staying in the basement for a long time and had just gone through some pretty intense family issues. Around that same time, I finally broke up with my toxic ex. The breakup was ugly, bad enough that the police got involved. That night, my brother didn't come home, so I stayed upstairs and slept on the couch, just in case he returned. When I got up around 8 the next morning, I went downstairs and immediately noticed things were out of place. My stuff wasn't where I had left it. My laptop was on. Feeling uneasy, I checked the browser history. The last page visited was for a bus route, from my house to my ex's. The bus was due to leave in just a few minutes. I started panicking. I went to the basement and found a makeshift bed in the back room, and the window was wide open. My ex had broken into my house and had been staying in the basement without anyone knowing. I had narrowly missed running into him in the middle of the night. Story 34. I'm a garbage man, not the big city kind who gets to use the fancy trucks that lift and empty the bins on their own. We still dump garbage cans by hand. One of our routes includes the outer edge of town, with rural pickups for households willing to pay extra for us to come out into the surrounding municipality. One day we were making a stop at a typical farmhouse. Lots of old vehicles around, general clutter. I opened the trash can and hooves. Just a massive pile of hooves. I think they were pig hooves, though the amount of brown hair on them made me think they might have been goat hooves. They were larger than a goat's, though. Swine farming isn't very common around here, but there is some wild boar hunting, which makes me wonder. Anyway, if you're going to throw out a huge pile of hooves, maybe put them in a bag? Don't just toss them at the top of the bin. That kind of thing makes you assume whoever lives there has a horror story behind those walls. Definitely not something you mentally prepare yourself to see first thing in the morning. Story 35. Back when my wife and I were still dating as undergrads in Montana, we used to sneak into the local Best Western to use their pool. It was usually empty, and we never caused trouble. Just a quick soak or swim. One time, though, the last time we ever did this, a family with 3 kids showed up, along with what seemed to be a family friend. No big deal. We weren't doing anything weird, just relaxing in the hot tub and pool. Then this guy walked in and asked if we minded if he got in the hot tub. Of course, we couldn't exactly say no. Before getting in, or even undressed, he kneeled next to the jacuzzi and dunked his head underwater. For over 30 seconds, then he pulled his head up, shook it, splashing us in the process, and repeated this 3 or 4 times. Now keep in mind, it was a rectangular hot tub, and we were all the way at one end. He chose to do this right next to us instead of using the open space at the other end. Eventually, he got in, fully submerged himself horizontally, and held his breath for about 30 to 40 seconds. While underwater, he stretched his legs out toward us, and we finally decided to leave when he started brushing us with his feet. We moved to the main pool where the 3 kids were playing. He stayed in the jacuzzi for another 10 minutes or so, then got out, wrapped himself in a towel, and crouched by the pool steps, near the shallow end where the kids were. He was crouched in a fetal-like position, arms wrapped around his legs, rocking back and forth while staring intensely at the kids. His expression just kept getting more intense. After a few minutes of this, he seemed to realize everyone was staring at him. As the kid's mother called hotel security, he got up and left. We started getting changed to leave. My wife went into the women's restroom while I waited. I looked out the window and saw him sitting in his car in the parking lot, staring directly at me, just sitting there, watching. I called the police and explained the situation, leaving out the part about sneaking into the pool, and we waited until he finally drove off. Story 36. When I was around 6 or 7, I lived with my dad, who had a lot of questionable habits and even more questionable friends. His main addiction was coca, but he was also involved in identity theft, impersonating police officers, and had a history of paying for drugs with inappropriate behavior. My mom, on the other hand, was a hardworking liquor store employee with dreams of living in the country and owning a small house where we could come stay with her. My parents had split when I was a toddler, after 6 years of my mom enduring physical abuse, including being nearly drowned in the bathtub a few times. Real charming guy, my dad. Over the years, my dad had a lot of drug buddies living with him on and off. One of them was named Mike. Mike was always friendly to my older sister and me, quiet, a bit emotionless, but he had a Great Dane, and to a 7-year-old kid, that made him seem safe. Every time he came around, he would ask us questions about our mom, where she worked, where she lived, what kind of house she had, who her neighbors were. We teased him, assuming he had a crush on her. In a child's mind, that was the worst thing a man could be guilty of. My mom didn't tell me this until about a month ago. I'm now 24. But apparently she got a call from a police officer friend at the time, an anonymous tip from a payphone. He told her that Mike had served time for manslaughter and armed robbery. He advised her to take us out of town immediately. Confused but alarmed, my mom, who was only a bit older than I am now, took my sister and me and left town for a week. When she returned, she found out that Mike had broken into her apartment building while we were gone and had later been arrested on unrelated charges. Authorities discovered evidence that he had been paid by my father to attack my mom as some twisted act of revenge for leaving him. And that's why, when people casually ask me about my parents, I tell them I don't have a dad.